She changes in the darkness. I spent those days in Guatemala, near the ancient city of Quirigua. While I was sunbathing and taking walks in the forest with my father and sister, my mom, an archaeologist, spent all the time on the digging site of the Mayan temple ruins. The excavations were later classified, as far as I know. After those holidays, I became a completely different person. Excerpt from Mike Johnson's school essay. Mom was acting weird. Usually talkative and cheerful, she had come back from excavations later than usual that day, silently walked into the house with a stony face, pushed the plate with pasta away at dinner, and silently went to bed, without looking at my father or me. Dad decided that magnetic storms and the solar eclipse that was supposed to happen soon were to blame. My mother had simply fallen ill and wasn't feeling well. It was very hot and I had drunk too much cold juice before going to bed, so I woke up in the middle of the night and went to the toilet. But I hadn't even gone halfway down the corridor when a very strange sound came from my parents' room. I should have just gone by the bed near the place where my mother usually slept. It was standing in the darkness. I looked closer and a chill ran down my spine. A twisted, terrible figure was swaying on the spot and tearing at the strange-looking tattered rags it was wearing. I squeezed my eyes shut, screamed in horror, and hit the light switch with all my might. When I opened my eyes, there was no longer any creepy figure there. My mom was standing next to the bed, white as snow, but still my mother, alive and normal. She covered her eyes with her hand. "Turn the light off, son," she said hoarsely. "Go to bed." That night, I spent a long time lying awake, thinking about what had happened. In the end, I decided I must have simply got confused. It had been dark. I had seen my mom's silhouette and imagined the rest. It became clear the next day that my mother wasn't okay. She didn't have breakfast or go to the dig site. She looked sick and stayed in the bedroom with the curtains tightly closed. And I could have sworn there was a very strange smell coming from the room she was in. A mix of rotten eggs and something musty, like an old basement or a cemetery. She was feeling better by the evening. She still looked very pale and ill, but she had at least left the room and joined us for dinner. Although, I really didn't see her eat anything. She was watching us, though, intently, not even blinking, it seemed. Me, my dad, my sister. She was clearly lost in thought. I got truly scared when my mom accidentally walked past a mirror in the corridor. She walked by, but her reflection didn't. It was only a couple of seconds, but I saw her reflection, distorted, with eyes burning with an otherworldly light, freeze and throw a completely inhuman smile at me. I don't know why I didn't scream then. I had never been so scared. I was literally paralyzed with horror. I was brought out of my stupor by Liz, who clutched my arm. My mother hadn't noticed how scared Liz and I had gotten, and she approached my father to say that she needed to go to the digging site at once. She had allegedly got a call from work, and it would be nice if Dad went with her. Even though my mother's phone hadn't rung once during the day, it was already dark outside. Our father agreed. My sister and I were left alone. We sat on the sofa in the living room, pressed against each other, and didn't understand what was going on. When the clock struck midnight and our parents still hadn't returned, I made up my mind. I told Liz everything I had seen, the oddities in our mom's behavior, the creepy figure in our parents' bedroom, and the mirror. I thought that my sister wouldn't believe me and would probably be right to do so, but Liz said she had also seen it too. That's when we decided to find out more about what exactly our mom did at work. We didn't even have to leave the house for that. We just Googled it. And here is what we found. Article after article said indifferently that the ruins found by the archaeologist were none other than an ancient Mayan city. Scientists were claiming that blood sacrifices to pagan gods used to be made there, and after the fall of their civilization, the surviving priests had mummified themselves alive right on the site of a former temple. Even reading about it all was creepy. Liz seemed to be thinking the same thing. We went to my room, locked the door, and blocked it with drawers, and spent the rest of the night in there. Our parents came back in the morning. I heard the hum of our father's car, then the slam of the front door, and finally, shuffling footsteps moved past my room. When our mom called Liz and me down to breakfast, I couldn't help but notice that she was clearly doing better. She was no longer as pale and exhausted. She looked a bit too cheerful for a person who hadn't slept all night. But our father, he turned his face away from the light, refused to eat breakfast, and eventually headed to the bedroom and tightly closed the curtains. Meanwhile, our mom left the room and went to the car, as if she hadn't noticed anything weird. Through the window, I saw her take out 2 strange boxes out of the trunk, one bigger than the other, and easily carry them to the garage as if they weighed nothing. Liz and I exchanged glances. She jumped off the chair and ran to the garage, and I went to check on our father. There was no one in the bedroom. I could tell by the sound of the water that Dad was in the bathroom, and decided he wouldn't be too angry if I peeked inside for a second. It was dark in the bathroom, just like in the bedroom. How was Dad taking a shower like that? But all my questions disappeared when I saw a creepy, twisted figure sitting on the bathroom floor and tearing off its rags. I shot out of my parents' bedroom like a bolt of lightning. I simply couldn't stay in the house any longer. I wasn't just scared anymore, I was terrified, and I saw no other way out but to escape. But then, the phone rang in the corridor. I picked it up and heard the tired voice of my mother's boss, Mr. Doe. I knew him. He often came to our house and told funny jokes about the excavations. But now, what he said made my blood run cold with horror.
Son, be strong now. I'm on my way already. I'll be there soon. Your parents have just been found dead at the excavations.
Parents? Dead? Who was walking around our house at that moment then? The only thing I could think was, warn Liz. My feet carried me to the garage by themselves. I really hoped my sister was still there, inside, and I wouldn't have to look for her in the house, because I absolutely couldn't go back in there. I should have just run. From home, from the city, from the country, anywhere, as long as it was away from what was waiting for me in that garage. My sister was lying on the concrete floor, looking like a broken doll. Mom was standing over her, frozen, and one of the weird boxes was open. Mom said something in an unfamiliar language and raised something that looked like an amulet above her head. A small mummy of what seemed to be a child inside the box stirred, making a strange creaking sound. The mummy abruptly rose and sat down on the edge of the box. I blinked, and instead of a dried-up body covered with torn rags, I saw Liz. Not the real one, who was still lying in the dark of the basement, but a pale, waxen Liz, covering her face from the dim light with her hand. I froze in a stupor, realizing that this was the end. I had to run, right then immediately before they noticed me. And then a heavy hand fell on my shoulder. My father's quiet voice behind me said that I was next. At that sound, my mother and sister turned around and took a step towards me in perfect sync. I jerked, and the hand on my shoulder squeezed harder, leaving bruises. My father pulled me forward to the last remaining box. Despair and terror gave me strength. I abruptly pushed the one who was pretending to be my father away, ignoring the pain in my arm, and I started to run. I stumbled, fell, thought it was definitely the end. But as I was lying in the sun, those creatures, they couldn't get close to me. There was a reason they had been afraid of the light. I was saved. No sooner had that thought flashed through my mind Then my mother took a step out of the darkness. With a terrible glued-on smile, she started moving towards me.
"We'll learn fast,"
she hissed without opening her lips. I started running again. I had an advantage. I knew that part of the jungle well and wasn't afraid of the sunlight. But my mother, or rather, the creature pretending to be my mother, was fast. Very fast. And unlike me, it wasn't getting out of breath from running, because it was barely breathing at all. But then, something I had completely forgotten to worry about happened. For some reason, it started to get dark. I stopped and looked up. Oh no. It couldn't be a coincidence. The sun was slowly getting blocked by a dark circle. The eclipse! The eclipse Dad had been talking about! I realized that trying to escape was useless when 3 figures immediately appeared right next to me. I rushed to one side, to the other, but they grabbed me by my clothes, clung to me with their dead, icy fingers. And then someone grabbed me across the chest, pulling me quickly towards them. I screamed and jerked in the last attempt to break free. The sun was shining again. Mr. Doe, my mother's boss, was hugging me to his chest. He was stroking my head and telling me that everything was over. I was hysterical. I kept looking back at the jungle behind us, but the 3 eerie silhouettes had disappeared without a trace. I realized that I had been saved. Miraculously, at the last moment, but saved. Mr. Doe took me to his house, promising to not leave me alone. While the adults were solving issues with the documents, and Mr. Doe was trying to get temporary custody of me, I sat in a stupor, looked at the wall, and couldn't believe that the whole nightmare had been real. I had survived, but my parents, my sister, how was I supposed to live without them now? Mr. Doe carried me on the small ship that was supposed to bring us from the island to a civilization in his arms. I was barely able to think because of all the drugs local doctors had pumped me full of. They put me in a cabin, told me to look after our things, and the ship sailed away. Halfway there, a wave hit the side of the ship, and Mr. Doe's big bag he hadn't parted with fell open. A wooden box fell on the floor in front of me. The one that my mother had brought from the car and hidden in the garage. At that same moment, Mr. Doe appeared in the doorway of the cabin with a creepy, glued-on smile and a glassy, expressionless look on his face. He nodded at the box, slowly, and said,
"I'm truly sorry about your family, Mike, but sacrifices are necessary. The hosts need bodies."